In the early hours of December 3rd, 1999, billionaire banker Edmond Safra locked himself in the panic room of his Monaco penthouse. He believed assassins had broken in. Hours later, he and one of his nurses were found dead. Killed not by violence, but by a fire that started from inside the building. No one saw intruders enter. Security systems never triggered. Safra's personal guards weren't there. But something clearly went very wrong. Within hours, Monaco, one of the safest places on Earth, was the center of a global mystery. Rumors pointed to organized crime, financial enemies, and even betrayal from within. The only thing everyone agreed on, the story didn't add up. Welcome to Bad Things. Join us as we follow the timeline, explore the theories, and examine what most likely happened in the case of Edmond Safra. To understand what happened in Monte Carlo in December 1999, it helps to understand who Edmond Safra was, and why people feared he might be targeted in the first place. By his late 60s, Safra was one of the most influential private bankers in the world. Born into a Jewish banking family in Beirut, he opened his first financial firm in Brazil in his 20s and spent the next 4 decades building an empire that spanned Geneva, New York, and the Caribbean. He specialized in private banking for the ultra-wealthy, heads of state, royalty, industrialists. His clients were global, and his discretion was legendary. But his success came with risks. In the insular world of offshore finance, Safra was a powerful player with access to sensitive financial flows. His banks had occasionally attracted scrutiny, sometimes mentioned in the context of money laundering investigations, though nothing was ever proven against him directly. By 1999, he was also cooperating with U.S. authorities on a high-profile financial case involving Russian capital flows through the Bank of New York. His name, in other words, carried weight and exposure. Safra was also known to be deeply cautious, some said paranoid, about personal security. He traveled with armed bodyguards. His homes were protected by layers of surveillance. He reportedly feared being kidnapped and at times would not stay in a location if certain safeguards weren't in place. He rarely left things to chance. His primary residence in Monaco was a symbol of that mindset. The penthouse apartment, perched above his own bank branch on Avenue d'Ostende, had reinforced doors, a private elevator, and a panic room concealed inside the master bathroom. Cameras monitored all major entrances. Bodyguards were stationed nearby, and a full-time medical staff cared for him as his Parkinson's symptoms advanced. It was, by every measure, a fortress. But on the night of December 2nd, 1999, something in that routine shifted. Safra gave his security team the night off. He remained at home with only 2 nurses on duty, Viviane Torrente, a long-time caregiver, and Ted Ma, a 41-year-old American who had joined the household staff just 6 weeks earlier. His wife, Lily Safra, was present too, sleeping in a separate wing of the apartment. Ma had previously worked as a nurse at Columbia Presbyterian in New York. He had served in the U.S. military and, according to multiple reports, impressed one of Safra's contacts by returning a lost camera, an act that indirectly led to the job offer in Monaco. He described his new position as the best he'd ever had, but behind the scenes, tensions had been growing. Ma reportedly felt disrespected by senior staff and feared he was on the verge of being dismissed. What happened next unfolded between midnight and dawn, inside a sealed apartment, behind armored doors, and ultimately inside a panic room that was meant to keep Edmond Safra safe. Shortly before 5 a.m. on December 3rd, Ma appeared in Safra's bedroom bleeding from stab wounds. He told Safra and Torrente that armed intruders had attacked him and were inside the apartment. The threat was taken seriously. As already mentioned, Safra was known to fear kidnapping, and Monaco's wealth had made him acutely security conscious. Safra and Tarenti retreated into the master bathroom, which functioned as a safe room. With its reinforced door locked, they believed they were protected from the attackers Ma described. Safra, weakened by illness, relied on Tarenti's assistance. They remained inside. Moments later, a fire broke out elsewhere in the apartment. Smoke alarms were triggered. Ma made his way to the building's lobby and told the concierge that intruders were attacking Safra upstairs. Emergency services were called. Police arrived quickly, but the report of armed assailants changed the nature of the response. Officers treated the situation as a possible armed assault or hostage scenario. Upstairs, smoke began spreading through the penthouse. From inside the locked bathroom, Vivian Tarenti made repeated phone calls seeking help. Between approximately 5 and 6:30 a.m., she contacted friends and colleagues, urging them to call police. In one call, she said, "We are under attack by a masked and armed man. We are not going to open up to anybody, no matter what they say." Her words suggested complete belief in an external threat. Safra also managed to call his wife Lily, warning her to stay locked inside her section of the apartment. Lily later escaped safely. Attempts were made to contact Safra from outside the bathroom, but he did not respond by opening the door. Police and firefighters faced delays. The penthouse was heavily reinforced, and responders were operating under the assumption that attackers could still be inside. At one point, Safra's chief of security arrived with keys, but was detained by police, who mistook him for a potential suspect. The fire continued to burn. It took nearly 3 hours from the first alarm for firefighters to breach the safe room. They ultimately accessed the apartment from above, cutting through the structure. When they reached the bathroom shortly after 7:30 a.m., Edmond Safra and Vivian Tarenti were dead on the floor. Both had died from smoke inhalation. Their bodies showed signs of heat exposure, but no evidence of physical assault. The fire was extinguished. Investigators identified more than one point of origin, a detail that immediately raised questions. No intruders were found inside the apartment. No forced entry was identified. The only injured survivor was Ted Ma. By morning, Monaco was in shock. A billionaire had died behind a locked door in one of the safest places on Earth. A fire had started inside a secured residence. A nurse claimed masked attackers had been present, yet none were found, and the very measures meant to protect Safra may have contributed to his death. In the days that followed, attention turned to Ted Ma. As the only injured party, the first to raise the alarm and the last person to see Safra alive, his role came under immediate scrutiny. His wounds were examined. His timeline was questioned, and inconsistencies began to emerge. Investigators found no trace of intruders. Surveillance footage showed no unknown figures entering the building. There was no forced entry, no sign of a struggle, only Ma, 2 dead bodies, and a story that didn't quite hold. But even as the case seemed to shift toward an internal explanation, doubts lingered. Why would a trained nurse set off a chain of events that led to the deaths of 2 people, including his own patient? How had the fire started? And why had Monaco's response been so delayed? To some, the case was already solved. To others, it had only just begun. Four main theories emerged in the weeks and years that followed. Each one told a very different story, and each for a time had serious traction. Theory 1. A professional hit, orchestrated by organized crime. One early and persistent theory was that Safra was targeted by professional killers, most likely from the Russian mafia or another criminal network with global reach. In this version, the fire wasn't accidental, it was a diversion or a trap. At the time of his death, Safra was reported to be cooperating with American authorities in a major investigation into Russian capital flight through US banks. Some speculated that leaking sensitive information may have made him a target. He had enemies in places where consequences can be terminal, one financial analyst told the Financial Times shortly after the fire. Others noted that Safra's banks had operated in regions prone to drug trafficking and arms deals. The theory suggested that trained assassins entered the building undetected, attempted to reach Safra, and, when they failed, set the fire to flush him out or kill him. Some pointed to the multiple fire origins as signs of coordination. Maher, in this scenario, was either attacked himself or used as an unwitting pawn. But skeptics quickly raised a critical point. Why would elite killers rely on such an unreliable method? One lawyer close to the family said bluntly, "Professional killers don't start trash fires and hope for smoke inhalation." Still, many remained unconvinced that such a powerful man could have died due to internal error. Theory 2. Financial motive. A deal someone wanted to stop. Another possibility centered on Safra's business empire. Just before his death, he had finalized the sale of Republic National Bank to HSBC for nearly $10 billion. The deal had global implications and enormous financial beneficiaries. In this version of events, someone with financial incentive, an investor, rival banker, or even an insider, sought to delay, derail, or sabotage the deal. Safra's death might not have been the goal, but the theory goes that removing him from the equation could have disrupted a process he personally controlled. Some tied this theory to earlier whispers about Safra's involvement in sensitive financial disclosures, noting that he had, in the past, been connected to large sums moving between jurisdictions. If he knew too much, or threatened to reveal it, taking him out might have benefited more than one party. But this idea carried problems. The deal was finalized just days after Safra's death, and no evidence emerged of anyone profiting from his absence. Nor did any investigations link the fire to a known rival. Yet the timing remained suspicious enough that the theory persisted. Theory 3. An inside plot. Family or staff betrayal. A darker theory pointed inward, that someone close to Safra, perhaps even a family member or trusted employee, engineered the incident from within. At the center of this was speculation about Safra's wife, Lily, and his extended family. Though there was no open conflict, some reports hinted at strained relationships. Lily Safra inherited much of Edmond's estate, and the nature of his will was never made public. Where there's wealth, there's motive, one journalist commented at the time. Adding fuel to the fire was Lily's personal history. Her previous husband had died decades earlier from gunshot wounds, ruled self-inflicted. Though no evidence linked her to either death, tabloid stories soon gave rise to the Black Widow label. The theory gained further oxygen when a UK paper was later forced to publish a legal retraction, admitting there was no basis to suggest Lily had any role. Other versions of this theory focused on staff dynamics. Could a personal vendetta, jealousy, resentment, or ambition have driven someone in Safra's inner circle to set off a chain reaction? The presence of multiple nurses, tensions in the household, and Maher's relative newness all made the internal scenario plausible. But no motive was ever established for anyone other than Maher. Theory 4. Maher as a scapegoat, a cover-up for something deeper. In the most controversial theory, Ted Maher was the fall guy. Supporters of this theory pointed to a series of anomalies: the strange timing of the fire, the multiple ignition points, and the alleged failure of interior security cameras. Maher, they argue, may have been telling the truth about an attack, But once things spiraled out of control, Monaco authorities needed a fast explanation. With its reputation on the line and international attention bearing down, pinning the blame on a foreign nurse with no political connections may have been the simplest solution. "Something doesn't add up," Ma's sister said in an interview years later. "How do you go from reporting an attack to being called the attacker?" This theory suggested the fire may have been part of a larger operation, botched or covered up, and that Ma's confession, when it came, was made under pressure, confusion, or exhaustion. Critics of the scapegoat narrative argue that no clear alternative scenario has ever been proposed. If Ma wasn't responsible, who was? And how did they disappear without a trace? Together, these theories shaped the global conversation around the case. Safra's wealth, isolation, and high-profile dealings made it easy to imagine enemies in every corner. The locked bathroom, the missing footage, the night without bodyguards. Each detail seemed like a clue. But the truth, when it came, was far more personal and far less cinematic. After weeks of speculation and years of rumor, Monaco's investigation reached a conclusion far less dramatic than the theories swirling around it, but also far more tragic. Stripped of conspiracy, the most likely explanation was that Ted Ma, acting alone, set a fire in a desperate and misguided attempt to impress his employer. The deaths of Edmond Safra and Vivian Torrente were not the result of an elaborate assassination or inside betrayal, but of panic, miscalculation, and a lie that spun out of control. What began as a bid for admiration ended in catastrophe. A solo actor with access and anxiety. Ma had motive, means, and opportunity. Hired only weeks earlier, he had access to Safra's private quarters and worked overnight shifts with little supervision. Reports from inside the household suggested Ma had grown insecure, feeling dismissed by senior nurses, and worried about his future in the role. In his own words, he wanted to show loyalty to Mr. Safra. The plan, as reconstructed by investigators, was simple but profoundly flawed. Ma would simulate an attack, stage a rescue, and emerge as a hero. To do that, he inflicted shallow stab wounds on himself, claimed masked intruders were inside, and then, while Safra and Nurse Torrente hid, set a small fire in a wastebasket to trigger an emergency response. What he didn't anticipate was how quickly the fire would spread, or how seriously responders would take the false report of armed attackers. Chain reaction. The core mechanism of the tragedy was set in motion by Ma's lie. Monaco police, believing an armed assault was unfolding, followed protocol. They secured the perimeter. They waited for tactical support. They didn't rush the building because they thought lives might be at risk from gunmen. Inside, Safra and Torrente, believing what Ma told them, refused to open the safe room, even as smoke began to fill the space. The panic room, meant to protect against external threats, became a trap. Calls were made, pleas were issued, but without clear information, and with Ma's story as their only guide, authorities moved slowly. Firefighters struggled to breach the fortified doors. Valuable time passed, and behind the sealed steel, 2 people waited for help that didn't arrive in time. By the time emergency responders reached them, both victims had succumbed to smoke inhalation. No injuries, no forced entry, no signs of actual intruders. Only Ma's superficial wounds and his unfolding confession. The evidence trail. The evidence aligned in one direction. Ma's knife matched his injuries. No fingerprints or footprints were found that suggested outside entry. Surveillance tapes covering building entrances showed no strangers arriving or leaving. There was no indication of a second person in the area where the fire started. The only narrative that accounted for everything, from access to ignition to confusion, was the one Ma eventually gave himself. Even his own legal team did not dispute the core facts. They argued not innocence, but intent, describing the fire as a reckless, delusional act, not a premeditated one. He wanted to be seen as brave, his lawyer said. He never meant for anyone to die. Ma's behavior during and after the incident supports that. He didn't flee. He went to the lobby to alert staff. He told responders that Safra was in danger. He believed, apparently, that he could fix the situation even as it unraveled. But his fabrications, especially the story of masked intruders, delayed the response that might have saved lives. As Monaco's chief prosecutor, Daniel Serde, put it, this was not a plot. This was one man's terrible idea. The idea that Ma was a scapegoat collapses under his own admissions. His confession wasn't vague. It contained detail only the perpetrator could know. His timeline matched the events, and even his defense accepted that he set the fire. What would be required to believe he was framed? A hidden perpetrator, no forensic trace, no witnesses, no motive, and a man who voluntarily claimed responsibility, in detail, for no reason. It's simply not credible. The simplest answer, backed by physical evidence, behavior motive, and first-hand statements, is that Ma caused the fire alone. It wasn't an assassination. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was a man inside a secure building who made a fatal mistake. Safra's security systems worked. The doors held. The panic room sealed. What no one expected was that the threat would come from inside, and that the very features designed to keep danger out would keep rescue at bay. Ted Ma has said many times since that he didn't mean for anyone to die. That may be true, but in practical terms, it doesn't matter. A lie became a delay became a death sentence, and a man who built his life on caution was undone not by enemies, but by trust misplaced in the wrong person. As Monaco's investigation concluded, the tragedy was not in the fire. The tragedy was in the belief that help was coming. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there.